Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us. Today, we are going to dive into the story of Malala Yousafzai
Oh, yeah.
and the Swat Valley in Pakistan.
Okay.
So we are using excerpts from her autobiography, I Am Malala.
Hmm.
And basically, we want to go beyond the headlines that most people hear about Malala's story
Right.
and really get into the complexities of the Swat Valley itself,
Yeah.
both before and after the Taliban, and really just dive in and get a really nuanced understanding of this whole situation.
Yeah. It's fascinating how, Malala's story is so intertwined with the story of Swat Valley.
Right.
It's not just a singular narrative. It's about, a community and a culture that are facing these immense changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that really struck me when I was reading I Am Malala,
Yeah.
was how she starts out by describing this incredibly beautiful, almost idyllic place. She calls it
Mhm.
heavenly,
Right.
a place of mountains and waterfalls and these clear blue lakes.
Right.
Really sets the scene right.
It does, and I think that contrast is so important because it makes you realize how jarring the shift is
Yeah.
that happens later.
Totally. And then we're introduced to Malala's early life,
Mm.
and her story, even from the beginning, is
Yeah.
full of these really unique cultural elements.
Right.
For example, her name Malala
Yeah.
is incredibly significant.
Absolutely. She was named after Malala Yousafzai,
Oh, wow.
who was this legendary Pashtun heroine who rallied troops against the British in the 19th century.
Wow.
It's kind of amazing. It's like foreshadowing almost.
Yeah.
But it also gives us this glimpse into Pashtunwali code, which is the system of honor and bravery
Mhm.
that really impacts Malala's upbringing.
Yeah, and she talks about that a lot throughout the book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then there's her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, who actually, he
Yeah.
kind of broke tradition by celebrating Malala's birth, which was commonly done for daughters.
Right.
So what does that tell us about him?
Well, Ziauddin plays a crucial role in Malala's story. I mean, he defied societal norms.
Yeah. But he was also just a huge advocate for education. He was a teacher himself, and he founded the Kushal School,
Right.
where Malala attended. And I mean, just think about it. Like in a society where many people believed a girl's place was in the home,
Yeah.
he championed her education.
Yeah.
It's that defiance of cultural norms rooted in his commitment to education
Yeah.
that I think really shapes Malala's journey.
That's a great point. And it makes those anecdotes from her childhood even more impactful.
Yeah.
She's playing teacher as a toddler. She was super competitive in school,
Hmm.
always wanted to be top of her class.
Right.
And, there's even this story about how she wants a classmate's fancy pencil.
Oh.
Not for herself, but because she thinks it will make everyone happy.
Yeah.
It's pretty heartwarming.
It is. It's that kind of innate desire for positive change,
Yeah.
even at such a young age,
Yeah.
shows us that Malala was really a unique child, even before she became this global icon. Yeah, and all of this is happening against this backdrop of the idyllic Swat Valley.
Right.
But then we start to see this kind of creeping darkness of extremism start to appear.
Yes.
She describes, the rise of the Taliban in neighboring Afghanistan
Mm-hmm.
and how that influence starts to kind of seep into SWAT.
Right.
What are the factors at play here?
Well, it's complex, but some key things are Pakistan's relationship with the U.S. after 9/11,
Okay.
and also the rise of madrasas in the region,
Okay.
which are these religious schools. And while many of them provided education,
Right.
some also became breeding grounds for more extremist ideologies.
Yeah. Okay. And so this creates this environment
Yeah.
where the Taliban's influence can take root.
Right.
And then comes the radio Fazlullah, right?
Yeah.
Whose sermons start to instill this fear and intolerance.
Yeah, these broadcasts were powerful propaganda tools for the Taliban.
Yeah.
They would use it to spread their message and restrict music and even impose stricter interpretations of Islamic law. And I mean, think about it. This is a time when SWAT is rapidly changing and
Right.
people are kind of grappling with all these shifts.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're told they can't do things they enjoyed.
Right.
And there's real consequences for those who disobey.
Yeah. It's this slow, gradual creep of extremism.
Yes.
Malala talks about restrictions on women,
Right.
destruction of cultural landmarks like Jahanabad Buddha,
Yeah.
this growing fear that permeates daily life.
It's almost like this shadow falling over the valley.
Yeah, and even as a young girl, Malala picks up on this shift.
Yes.
She's experiencing fear and confusion, but also this budding awareness of injustice,
Mm-hmm.
especially regarding women's rights.
Totally.
And we see that spirit, that awareness,
Yeah.
in these small acts of defiance, like when she plays band music on her phone.
Yes.
Small act of rebellion, but huge considering the atmosphere at the time.
Absolutely. A hint of the courage she'll later display on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
But what's happening here is that Swat Valley is becoming increasingly volatile. The
Right.
Taliban's grip is tightening, and it leads to these school bombings and targeted killings.
Yeah. And it's at this point that Malala's father, Ziauddin,
Yes.
becomes even more vocal in his opposition to the Taliban.
Right.
He's incredibly brave. He's openly speaking out against them, despite the very real threats against him and his family.
Yeah.
What do you think fueled his courage?
Well, remember, Ziauddin was a champion of education from the start.
Yeah.
He understood the value of knowledge of critical thinking, especially in a society that was vulnerable to extremism.
Right.
But he was also a man of principle,
Yeah.
deeply impacted by that Pashtunwali code that we talked about,
Right.
which emphasizes courage and standing up for what's right.
Yeah.
So even amidst this fear and violence,
Yeah.
he refused to stay silent.
That's fascinating. And so we have this backdrop of escalating violence.
Yeah.
Malala's father bravely defying the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in this incredibly tense environment that Malala takes a step that changes her life forever.
Yes. At the urging of a BBC correspondent, she agrees to write a diary about her life under Taliban rule.
Wow.
She uses the pseudonym Gul Makai,
Okay.
and her words provide this raw and powerful account of the reality in Swat Valley.
It's incredible to think that this young girl living through such turmoil is documenting it all.
Right.
You know, her diary entries, they offer this glimpse into the everyday struggles of a community living in fear.
Yeah.
You know, she's writing about the closure of girls' schools,
Right.
the constant threat of violence,
Mm-hmm.
and yet the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced.
It's really powerful.
What stood out to you in these entries?
You know what strikes me is how Malala's voice goes beyond simply recording events.
Yeah.
Even in these early writings, there's this unwavering belief in the power of education.
Yeah.
So even as her own world is shrinking,
Right.
her words are reaching this global audience, and they're sparking this conversation about girls' education and the fight against extremism.
It's almost like her voice is growing stronger as her world becomes more restricted.
Exactly. And this diary becomes a turning point in her story.
Yeah.
It propels her onto a larger stage.
Right, yeah.
And it sets in motion the events that will lead to her becoming a global icon.
And that is where we will leave off for now.
Bro.
So join us in part 2 as we delve deeper into Malala's journey. Yeah. Explore the impact of her diary,
Right.
the escalating dangers that she faces, and her unwavering pursuit of education.
Absolutely. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Malala Yousafzai.
So when we left off, Malala's voice was reaching a global audience through her BBC diary.
Right.
But as her profile rose, so did the danger she faced.
Yeah, it's almost paradoxical, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
here she is, this young girl in Swat Valley, writing about her experiences,
Right.
and it's connecting with people worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the very act of speaking out puts her in incredible danger.
Yeah.
The Taliban had made it very clear that girls were not to attend school, and anyone who defied them would face consequences.
And her diary entries really started to reflect that growing tension.
Yeah, they became bolder. Her criticisms of the Taliban were more direct.
Right.
And it's so important to remember she was living under this constant threat,
Right.
yet she refused to be silenced, and that takes a lot of courage.
It really does. And it wasn't just Malala. Her whole family was living with this danger.
Right.
Her father, Ziauddin in particular, was such a pillar of strength,
Absolutely.
supporting her activism, even when it put their lives at risk.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think they navigated that as a family?
Well, it speaks to their deep bond and their shared belief in the importance of education.
Yeah.
Imagine living with that level of fear,
Right.
knowing that you're being targeted simply for wanting to learn.
Yeah.
They really held on to hope in a very dark time.
And then there's this moment in the book where the Pakistani government negotiates a peace deal with the Taliban,
Yeah.
and it seemingly brings an end to the violence, at least for a time.
Right, but as Malala points out, it was a very fragile peace.
Right. She calls it a funny kind of peace
Yeah,
because the Taliban's influence remained,
absolutely.
and their restrictions on women continued even as the government was declaring victory.
Right, it's like that underlying tension was still there, just beneath the surface.
Yeah, and then things take an even darker turn
Oh, yeah.
with the public flogging of a young woman
Right.
for supposedly violating the Taliban's strict moral code.
This incident was a turning point.
Yeah,
It shocked the world, and suddenly the reality of what was happening in Swat Valley was impossible to ignore.
right. And what's so significant is that Malala had been writing about these atrocities for months,
Yeah.
trying to get the world to pay attention.
Mm.
This event tragically validates her accounts.
Yeah, it's a horrific reminder of the brutality that was still occurring despite this so-called peace.
Right, and it's in this climate that Malala and her classmates start a secret school.
Wow.
They couldn't attend the regular school because of the Taliban's ban on girls' education.
Right.
But they refused to give up on learning.
Think about the risks that these young girls were taking simply by gathering to study.
I know.
It just highlights their incredible thirst for knowledge and their defiance in the face of this oppression.
Yeah. And it also underscores Malala's emerging leadership.
Absolutely.
You know, she understands that education is key to their future, and she won't let the Taliban take that away from her or her friends.
It's a powerful testament to their strength and resilience.
But as these girls are holding on to their right to education,
Yeah.
the situation in Swat is deteriorating.
Right. The peace deal collapses, and the Pakistani army launches this full-scale military operation against the Taliban.
Wow.
This is a period of just immense upheaval.
Yeah.
Families are forced to flee their homes,
Right.
seeking refuge elsewhere. Malala and her family become internally displaced persons, or IDPs.
Right.
It's a term that we hear a lot in news reports.
Yeah.
But here it's deeply personal. This is Malala's life.
And even amidst all that chaos and displacement, her focus on education never wavered.
It's remarkable.
She writes about missing school and worrying about falling behind in her studies.
It speaks to the depth of her commitment to learning.
Yeah.
It's not just about attending school.
Right.
It's about the empowerment that comes with knowledge, with being able to think critically and shape your own future.
Eventually, Malala and her family are able to return to Swat,
Okay.
but it's a changed valley. Their home is damaged. Their school has been desecrated by the Taliban.
Right. There's this sense of unease that kind of lingers.
It's a stark reminder of the lasting impact of conflict.
Yeah, and it's not just about the physical damage. It's
Right.
about those psychological scars, that
Yeah.
sense of security lost.
And yet Malala's activism continues.
She does. She speaks at events. She gets
Yeah.
interviews.
Right.
She uses her growing platform to advocate for girls' education.
Yeah, she becomes this symbol of hope,
Right.
of defiance against those who would deny girls their basic rights.
But that visibility also makes her a target.
Right. The Taliban issues death threats,
Yeah.
making it clear that they see her as a serious threat.
It's chilling to think about the weight of those threats.
I know.
That constant fear hanging over Malala and her family.
But they refuse to be intimidated.
They do. They continue their work believing that the cause of education is worth the risk.
And then on October 9th, 2012, the unthinkable happens.
Oh, wow.
Malala's on her way home from school, riding the bus with her friends, when a Taliban gunman boards and asks, "Who is Malala?"
Oh, my gosh.
He shoots her at point-blank range, hitting her in the head.
Wow.
2 other girls are also injured in the attack.
Oh, God.
It's a moment that sends shockwaves around the world.
Absolutely. This brutal act of violence against a young girl who dared to speak up for her right to education
Right.
becomes a global turning point.
It's a moment that's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah.
And as Malala clings to life, her story,
Mm.
which had been this source of inspiration,
Right.
now becomes a source of global concern and outrage.
Her shooting really marks a turning point, not just in Malala's life,
Yeah.
but in the fight for girls' education worldwide.
Yeah.
The world is holding its breath, waiting to see if she will survive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the story of Malala.
Yeah, it's hard to believe we're already at the final part of this story.
I know, right? And we left off at such a moment of fear and uncertainty.
Right. The world was holding its breath, waiting to see if she would survive.
And she was fighting for her life.
Exactly. She underwent multiple surgeries, first in Pakistan, and then she was flown to the UK for specialized treatment.
And the details of her injuries and all the medical procedures are just fascinating to read about.
Yeah, I mean, they had to remove part of her skull to allow for brain swelling, and there was a tracheotomy.
Oh, yeah.
And they even had to reconstruct her facial nerve.
It's just incredible what she endured physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
And, even through it all, she never lost focus on her education.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first things she asks for when she wakes up in the hospital in Birmingham is her school bag.
Isn't that amazing?
Like, even in that state, her mind went right to her studies.
It shows how deep that dedication to learning really was.
For sure. It wasn't just a phase. It was core to who she was.
Yeah. And Her recovery was a long and arduous process.
Oh, absolutely. She had to relearn how to walk and talk,
Right.
undergo painful procedures,
Yeah.
and adapt to this whole new life far from home.
And it's during this time that we really see the strength of her family.
Yes, they were there for her every step of the way,
Always right by her side.
providing this unwavering support, you know?
And her father is just this incredibly moving figure in the story.
Absolute.
His belief in Malala, his dedication to education, his courage in the face of danger.
He could have easily chosen silence,
Right.
prioritize their safety over their principles.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He stood by Malala.
Yeah, he really amplified her voice.
And as Malala recovered,
Yeah.
her voice only got stronger on the world stage.
Mm.
She continued to advocate for education. She spoke at the UN, she met with world leaders,
Yeah.
and she just used her platform to inspire so many millions of people.
And it's crazy to think that what the Taliban intended to be this silencing act
Yeah.
actually had the opposite effect.
It did. It amplified her message, and it made her this global icon for girls' education.
And what's so powerful about her story
Mm.
is that it goes beyond the specific circumstances of Swat Valley.
Absolutely.
It speaks to this universal desire for knowledge and freedom
right.
and for a better future.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to look at the injustices that girls face all over the world.
Those who are denied access to education.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for our listener? Why should they care about Malala's story?
It's a story about the power of one voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
One girl who dared to speak truth to power.
Mm.
It's about the potential of education to transform lives and the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah. And it challenges us to confront injustice,
Absolutely.
stand up for what we believe in,
Yeah.
and to never stop learning.
Malala's journey really reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail.
That's so true. And it's a call to action
It is.
to support education and empower girls all over the world. So
Yeah.
we encourage you to learn more about Malala's work,
Yeah.
her foundation,
Yeah.
and ways that you can get involved.
I think her story is a good reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just a final thought to leave everyone with is that
Yeah.
Malala's story is not just about her.
Yeah.
It's about the countless girls
Right.
who are still fighting for their right to an education.
All over the world.
And even though their stories may not make headlines,
Yeah.
their struggles are no less real,
Mm-hmm.
and their dreams are no less deserving of our support.
Exactly.
So thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Malala Yousafzai.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.